First of all, I'll go into the history of color from 1820 to 1920 and then correlate that also with what is happening in Mount Vernon at that time. And at the end of the session, we have Ken Pospisil, who is a paint contractor here in Mount Vernon. He's responsible for a lot of the homes on the Cornell campus that have had different color schemes done to that. And so we can use him as a reference afterwards. Well, anyway, there were 4 major color phases, and this is basically, you have to always remember in our nation, it always starts on the coast and works its way inward. And so this is in reference to the East Coast. And between 1820 and 1840, late Federal through Neoclassic area, white with green shutters is very common. In fact, Charles Dickens came to Massachusetts in 1842, and when he got off the boat and went into the town, he thought that's what caught his eye, is all the white houses and the green shutters, or they called them Venetian blinds, and how quaint it was. Everything looked fresh and clean. And then we got into the 1840s and to 1870, and that's the Gothic and Italianate revival, or the early Victorian period. And this is where we came into Andrew Jackson Downing was an architect, and he started raising the controversy of, well, white is really an atrocious color. I mean, it doesn't blend in with the natural surroundings of homes. It's, you know, the greens, the browns, the trees. And so he had people really think about what they were looking at. And so at that time period would be more in the Greek and Gothic period, and Mount Vernon was being established. And that period of time, you saw the pale earth tones introduced, a really light browns, grays, taupes that were used. One book regarding the history of paint by Roger Moss goes through the different color plates that were introduced at that time. And this is just really a good reference to get an idea of what was going on. 1870 to 1890 was the late Victorian, and in Mount Vernon that would have been your Foursquare, your Queen Anne that you would have been seeing as far as construction. And that's where you see the dark, rich, or muddy colors is what they refer them to, used in painting homes. And then 1890 to 1920, you have the Colonial Revival, and that's the gradual return to our whites and pastels. Well, as you know, and in Mount Vernon, that would have been the Craftsman Bungalow building time. But as you know, things move slowly to the Midwest, and so there's been a lot of controversy about white being historically correct. And really, by the time the idea of early Victorian, late Victorian colors came to this area, the East Coast was back to the pastels and the whites again. So it just kind of reinforced our philosophy. And also it's the Midwest thing of everything clean and pretty and orderly. Also, there is a phase that happened in the, people get it confused thinking this was part of the Victorian era, but it's the painted ladies. And that was a movement in San Francisco in the late 70s, early 80s. And they used pastels, many, many colors to get the look that they have. But that was just a short time period in San Francisco. Okay, now this is probably one of the hardest things for any paint owner, and that's selecting a color, whether your home is historically of historic significance or not. And a lot of it is based on personal taste. Basically, that's a lot of it. And styles, age, framework. And if you have questions as far as, well, you know, was my house always white? Or was it different colors at one time in its history? Sometimes you can get photographs of your old home to see that there's different tones, a lighter tone and a darker tone, that would give you some type of indication. There also is a paint analysis that you take a section of the paint on your home, but that can be very costly to have done. And paint bills, if you are lucky enough to have a record of the paint that was bought for the home, you may find it out from that. One of the paint shops in Storm Lake where I came from, that they did keep a history of paint owners and what they bought from them, so you could go back and see what was there. Also, the other thing that you should take in consideration is the roof line, the shingle color, when you select a color for your home, the base paint. Paint sampling, do it yourself. If you're not sure, Sherwin-Williams has a nice sampling of historic colors. Benjamin Moore does too, and these are all local. Cedar Rapids, Mount Vernon, and Ace Hardware locally does too. So, and those are over on the table if you want to pick one up. One thing that we did on our home to try to figure out what color combinations we wanted to use is to take a drive around town, or in Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, and if there's a house that you like, the color, that's a way to do it. Also to buy quarts of different colors of paint and paint a section of your home to see if that looks good or if it needs to be darker or lighter. That can also give you an idea. You're to avoid primary colors and really bold colors for these periods of time. They're not really appropriate. Also look at the size and location of your building. Look at your neighborhood as a whole. What are the colors of the other houses? Would your house stick out like a sore thumb if you chose certain colors? And we do, in any neighborhood or any city that you live in, there's always examples of that. Also, one thing that I found out this summer is go across the street, and when you're painting your house or you're choosing colors, get the view that your neighbor would have. Because we don't usually, we're not really looking at our house when you're painting it. You're either in front of the house in the front walk, but go across the street, look at the different angles, what your neighbor is viewing when they get up in the morning or look out their window. And that was really an eye-opener for us this year. Okay, the general rule is the larger the home, we'll take a darker color. And a small home is a lighter color, to use a lighter color for the base. If you use a darker color on a smaller home, it's going to make the house even look smaller than it is. Also, the rule of thumb is for how many colors can I use on a house to be historically correct. A lot of the slide presentations this morning showed homes that most of them just had two colors, and that was very appropriate. And one for the base color and one to trim out the windows. You can also introduce a third color. That would be like the molding on doors. You could add to highlight that. Or a fourth color can be introduced, again, to highlight doors or window sashes or combination windows you might have. Black was one that was used on combinations or your storm windows to kind of highlight the window in itself. So those are to be considered. Garage doors, you should use the body color of the house. Sometimes if you use a different color, it just makes those garage doors just stand out. Let's see. Foundation, we have talked about, foundation throughout the day. And if it's never been painted, don't paint it. With your limestone, your brick. You can have exceptions, with your concrete that so that it doesn't stick out, that people have used grays or light browns or in the base of the house to make it go together quite well, to harmonize. Blue was not used in the 19th century, and it was not a stable color. It faded very easily. And also I don't believe they had the pigment to duplicate the rich blue colors also. So that would not be historically correct. Okay, an exterior paint problem, just like everything else in old homes, moisture is your number one problem. And our home here in Mount Vernon had everything you could think of that would cause moisture problems. And so you need to step back and look at your home to see, okay, where are my problems that could be causing the moisture? Eaves, how about the shade trees? You have a lot of shade trees around your house. Branches may need to be trimmed that just, you have a lot of, that the siding doesn't get, is not allowed to dry out after a rain or a dew. Landscaping, we have problems with landscaping around our foundation, and it also interferes with when it rains, that it splashes back up on the siding of your house. Gutters, our home had not had gutters for over 12 years when we bought it. So it definitely had taken a toll on the siding. And of course, before you paint, repair and replacement should take place. And we did a lot of that. Try to use, like they said, try to use what you have if it's not rotted. But otherwise, we used cedar siding on places, but I'll tell you, it was really, even this summer we had problems with locating cedar siding at lumberyards because the new buildings now are all sided aluminum siding or vinyl siding, and so it is hard to find some of those materials. And also be sure to caulk. You know, after you've done all this work and such, be sure you caulk your nail holes underneath your board, underneath your siding, to make sure that you are preventing future moisture problems. Okay. Now, in regards to paint removal, the Department of Interior has 3 different classes for historic buildings. And class 1 is one we all wish we had, and that was no paint removal. And that you would just have to go through with a garden hose and wash it off. And one thing that you could use is like an extension for to clean a car. You have that extension hose with a mop at the end of it. Those can be used or just by hand, just good old water and scrubbing. Again, as we've talked about before, avoid high pressure cleaning with water. I know that some people have done it locally and have been lucky with it, but I have seen cases where the water did go in the interior walls. And also, mildew is a common problem, either under your gutters or up in the eaves. And most of these solutions are just things that household remedies, like the bleach solution and scrubbing to remove some of the mildew from that, good drying out. And also the mildew, again, look at your area. Do you have shade trees that need to be trimmed out or whatever? Okay, class 2 is limited paint removal, where you would just have to scrape and sand. And that's where most of us do fall into. And the main thing there is, in using your tools, you know, your scrapers and everything, keep them sharp after you use them during the day. And that does help with the paint removal. You don't want to gouge your wood, so it's really important to keep them sharp. Where you see limited paint removal is you may have hairline cracks in your painting. And your main thing about painting is you want to prevent any more moisture problems. So even with hairline cracking or inner coat peeling, where you see layers of paint peeling off but you still have some paint underneath, that in that respect you just want to have a good priming and latex coating to seal those moisture problems so you won't have future problems. Now class 3 is a total paint removal, and I've done that on the last 2 houses that we've owned, and it's not an easy task. But the end results are the best. You won't be back up in the ladder in 5 years. So anyway, the problem there is that bare wood is exposed on your siding. You have that alligator pattern that you see, and you can see in between it that there is wood exposed. Or peeling that's so bad that the wood is exposed or, you know, partially off. It is labor intensive and it is costly if hired. And there's been several homes in Mount Vernon in the last 4 years that have done this, and it did take them 3 summers to get it done, and ourselves included. What you can use in order to remove the paint, which is recommended, you can use heat, and that is a heat gun. And this is really good for, you know, your brackets, your cornices, really hard places to get. And also, we have a heat plate And you could check with your paint stores to see if they have it or if they could order it for you. We were pretty lucky. I mean, this was like 15 years ago that we got ours. But this is a really nice method where you have a hot heating element, and you just put it up against the siding of the house. It gets underneath the clapboard, and then you just take a scraper and go along. With any of these heating methods, you have to be really careful you don't set the house on fire. And so you keep a spray bottle of water, and I'll tell you, there's areas that you don't know that didn't realize they were dry, or there was dry rot involved, and Dave and I have run into the house to get water on a couple occasions. So you need to think about that. You can use a belt. This is when you're down to, if you have bare areas of wood for the paint removal. You can use a belt or orbital sander, but if you have multi-layers of paint, this is not recommended. You can really do a lot of damage to the siding of your home if you don't know how to do it. And if you're considering that, then you really should have a professional. And you also have to consider the dust that you generate, because most of our homes in Mount Vernon had lead paint one time or the other, and that is a real hazard. Can be. Okay, actual painting of the house. Ideal season is, well, late spring, late summer, to the late summer. You're really starting, September you usually can get by if you have good, you usually can and do get by, but you have to be really aware of temperatures and when you stop painting during the day. And bare wood, when you prime it with an oil, temperature conditions should not be less than 45 degrees at night. That's ideal. And so just keep that in mind. And when you put your finish on, as far as latex, again, it shouldn't be less than 50 to 55 degrees during the night. And as far as heat is concerned, neither one should be painted, oil or latex used, if it's above 90 degrees. And if you're taking the risk when you do this of the paint doesn't dry thoroughly or absorb because of moisture. And so a rule of thumb has always been for me, and I don't always abide by it, but if you quit at dusk during the summer, and that can take you for a while, but you want to give that latex or that oil time to absorb. Also, when you prime a home, you should at least let that primer set up for 24 to 48 hours before you latex it. Otherwise, you won't have a good adhering of the latex. And I can't emphasize enough, we talk about cost, but if you get a good paint, it really does pay off. And not, we always kind of want to go, it's an expensive ordeal as it is if you do it yourself or you contract it out. But a good quality paint will make it worth the labor. And if you do it this way, it should last 8 to 15 years. Our house in Storm Lake, we did it, and they painted, it did not have to be painted again until 10 years later. So I thought that was pretty good. Another thing I want to emphasize in actual painting is safety. With ladders and everything, placement of ladders, just the common sense things of not staying on your ladder and jumping it across the house. I've seen that done. It's not really safe and the position when you're on a roof and everything. Fortunately, I have a tall husband, and that hasn't been a problem on the roof. So just think about that. Safety is a real issue. Also, as far as lead paint, if you use heating methods, try not to let it catch on fire, the paint, and sometimes it will, and you just put it out, but you get the lead fumes off of that, and that's more detrimental than if you put the heat plate is one that will easily, if you're not paying attention, the paint catches on fire. So here you're burning off these lead fumes. So just keep that in mind. I think Dave and I have lost a few brain cells over this, for sure. Yeah, you can get respirators, face masks, anything, to help. Some of it is you know, it's all to your preference and your safety. You know, it's important. But the dust is really a problem. After you remove the, I should also say, after you remove the paint thermal, you know, as a thermal method, you do have to go over the wood with a sander, either a belt sander or regular hand sander, to get off the residue. So it is very painstaking work. Also, I wanted to say another thing, when you have to replace wood, and I ran into this problem this past year, that sometimes you may have a bleed through of your wood, you know, from the oils. And so what you have to do is you can take a bleach and just a non-ammonia detergent and mix the two together and just clean that surface off. And then use a, there's Zinsser and there's Bin, there's all different types of sealants. And you put that on, let it dry for 48 hours. You may want to put another coat on and then put your latex coat on again. And that should take care of the problem. But I can't overemphasize moisture as being your one problem. That's what you want to remedy. And, you know, to spend your money on a good paint. It will last long. And as far as, you know, just slapping the paint on and just getting over with, you'll have to go back and do it over and over again more frequently. So it's better to do a good job the first time around. So, any questions? And Kenny, would you want to come up?
One thing you might want to know, after you sand it, at the very least, you want to tack off.
Right. That you clean that off. Thank you. Yeah, clean it. It's for sure. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
My grandfather had a wooden clapboard house, and it was always green. Every house he ever had, he painted green. He was German, and he painted one side every year, so that in between the time he harvested his crops in the garden, he would choose a side, and he would paint that side, and then go around to the next one the next year. So he was a constant production with painting, and it looked done all the time, and it wasn't so time-consuming that it might be something that we might think about today in our busy lives. You don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah, and we had friends in Storm Lake. They had a huge Queen Anne, and that's what they did every year. And so that's a factor. To me, personally, for me, that would drive me nuts. Have it, that I'd have to always go back to it every summer. But that's just me personally. Other people function better that way. So, but that is true. A lot of people did do that. There's a Dale.
Yeah, John and Kim, you're both familiar with my big project that I have. And I'm having to deal with paint jobs that was probably done by an auto mechanic. And it was done very sloppily, and it's on the brick. And I'm wondering, and it's on the cement brick as well. I'm wondering if there's a standard procedure, a standard method for stripping that paint off the brick.
Go ahead.
Well, whatever you do, it's going to be a fun project because it's very hard to get off, especially the older the paint, the harder it is to get off, obviously, because it dries and gets into the pores of the cement or brick, and that just makes it that much more difficult. A stripper solution would do some of it, and wire brushing. You have, I don't know if that's, you have to be concerned about that, doing things to the mortar and to the brick too. So I'd have to look at it specifically to see, but every situation is a little different, so you have to kind of, play it by ear, look at the situation, and then try to figure out the best solution to that at that point. But I know that's a very vague answer for you right now, but I think you need to proceed that way. Probably have somebody look at it and see what the best option is for you for your particular job.
That brought up a good question or things to remember. When you are painting a house, cover as much as you can as far as roof, shingles, the foundation, shrubs and everything, because the mess that you would have to clean up from the drips is sometimes you can't do it. Some of the tips that, of the trade that I used in the past were on, if you have a dark shingled roof, take a stick, you know, with the, up with you, bark and everything. And if you get paint on the shingle, just rub across that area and it'll blend right in. Also on foundation with the stone, if you got a light colored paint or any paint on it, you can just take a, what we did is just take some dirt, a little bit of dirt and rub it in, and it absorbs the paint and didn't discolor the foundation.
This is one of my concerns, is that when the paint is stripped, where it's dripped and whatever, it will expose very clean wood, which will not be the same as the rest of the house. And I may have to re-dirty it or something, or wash the entire house. And I don't know, I've heard that that's not good for stone masonry.
I mean, if you use the method that was suggested by Lee as far as washing the house, you know, over time, even after you removed it, it would age, but, you know, those are the things that you have to factor in. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. A couple of things I'd just like to mention quick before I forget them, that when you were discussing stuff about caulking and priming, I don't know if you talked about before window sash and that kind of thing, but if you're reglazing windows or doing storms or anything like that, make sure if you don't remove all of the glazing and reglaze completely, which a total restoration is doing that, but if you do not do that, if you're just spotting in, make sure you either to prime the bare wood on the window sash first. What that does, and that's the same with caulking also. When you caulk, I do anyway, I always prime first. Now maybe you've talked about this.
No, I haven't, but go ahead.
Always prime first and then caulk, and then put your finish coats over that, because what happens is the moisture in the caulk penetrates into the dry bare wood and dries quicker and cracks quicker. So if you seal that wood up first and then caulk it or glaze it if you're glazing windows, that may help you too as far as longevity. As far as the window glazing, I don't know if any of you have run into that or had to do it, but make sure when if you have to replace glass, I don't know what the quiet procedure is for glass replacement on the older windows. I mean, obviously if they're broke, you have to do something with them, so, but just make sure that you put points in to hold the glass in prior to glazing too, because if you don't, that glazing does crack around the areas, and then your windows will become looser. So it's good to seal those up also. So just a couple things I thought about.
That's really good. Also, a lot of people have combination windows, and fortunately for a lot of you, they're white, and it fades right into, you know, a lot of homes are trimmed out in white. We came into the problem, it was our choice because of the colors that we wanted, that we did need, the old wood storms were in very poor condition, so we did have to go to a combination window. And we were trying to find black, but they don't manufacture black in this part of the country. They said if we lived in the South, we would have been lucky. So your options are really the dark brown or the white for combinations that you put on homes. And so what we're doing is another tedious process of painting them, mill finish painting them black, and to give that look. But, you know, that's all matter of choice and how far you want to go with the look. And also another thing to consider, and this was pointed out to me, if you do order combinations, and we were doing black, it was suggested, make sure the screen is black. If you had the aluminum look on the screen, your focus would be on the screen, not on the window itself. So there's just little tidbits like that, yeah. Right, mill finish, you prime it and then put a latex finish on it. Yes.
Is there a reference material for maybe the less color? I'm not very good with color and trims and all that.
Yeah.
Is there any reference material that can say that when it's all white, you can't see the various moldings and things that are lurking in behind if you were to do the right color combinations? Are there tips, tricks, and other things like on the internet you can get?
Yeah, there are, and in fact, a lot of the material that we got was from the Old House Journal that we got off the internet. Also, there's the Old House Journal, the one that recently came out, had a thing on paint and history. A lot of resource materials that we have in the back of the guidelines for painting that are just basic tips on that. Also, if you can always come and ask the commission. We can give you ideas, try to steer you in the right direction. Yes.
I've got several windows, and I don't think anybody's used them for years. They're all even the ones we take out, taken in. So that there are some windows that I'm not, and then all the time tape that goes in to hold the window up. And I'd like to be able to hold them all, and I don't have any tips on how to do that without having to strip all the paint off the wood, which is mahogany.
The only
Are you talking about the inside now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The only thing that I would suggest, you could take a utility knife between and see if you could get it loose with that, or cutting if there was an area. You basically would probably have to strip it out with heat or whatever. That was done in the interior of my homes, and that was, I could get the bottom windows up. It was a choice of how far did I want to go with it, and they're still painted shut.
A lot of times you're, if they painted the inside shut, more than likely the outside's painted shut too. So you're going to have to get on the outside and cut the paint on the outside to loosen those up, because you just can't. You have to do both sides of it to do that. But there's a tool that you can use that for outside anyway. It's not near as fine-tuned as what you'd want to use inside, but it cuts cuts that old paint out of there, so it'll loosen the outside sash up for you at least.
So if you have a lot of layers, that would be a good idea, because there's no way you could keep it uniform. It's not like it's just one layer, I think it's been done.
Right, but you probably have 10 or 15 coats on there, and you'll have a ridge there where you break the paint between the sash and the actual frame of the window, where there's going to be probably a ridge, unless you do an awful lot of sanding to smoothen that out, or there might be some. It just depends how much of it chips off too. A lot of it, chips off. Some of the times it doesn't. It just depends if it's probably oil and latex and a combination of a lot of things. So if it is, it just complicates it that much more. But well, a lot of the things that you do is determine on how much time you have and how much you want to spend, or how much money you want to spend. And to do a lot of things, I mean, most of the stuff is very labor intensive. I mean, to prep and paint the exterior of a house, obviously, the paint isn't very much in comparison to the actual labor doing it. So, those are all factors, and it just depends on how much and how far you want to go personally.
The doors at my house had big cracks in it, and we just filled it up with that resin epoxy. Was there a different solution we could have used? I mean, big cracks like this. It's a big solid piece of wood that set into the masonry itself, so it wasn't something I wanted to remove.
Right.
So we just put that wood epoxy stuff.
You just filled in the cracks with that,
and then can after can of it, and filled it up, and then sealed it.
and then painted over it.
And painted over it.
How long ago did you do that?
Still
Is it
there.
cracked? Is it cracked or anything?
No, it's still there.
Did you prime it with oil primer?
Yeah.
And then oil over top?
Yeah, actually it's got a mahogany stain on it.
Oh, it's stained? Oh, it's
Yeah,
stained?
It was not a
Okay.
painted
Oh, okay.
door sill, it was a big slab of timber, big thing.
Right.
And it wasn't something that.
Well, that probably be as good as anything, but something that hardens and doesn't shrink is the key to that.
Another thing is, when you have the opportunity, when you are prepping a house, make sure One thing that I saw was a pet peeve of mine, just leaving the old window brackets, or, you know, the little hooks for the screens, and, you know, they don't have that on the house anymore. Anything that isn't appropriate to the house or has been accumulated over the years, this is a good time to clean it up, you know, get it off. Yes, please.
This is a question back to the windows, when you're painted shut windows and all, and you're thinking about glazing and all, to either Ed or to any of the contractors here. Being this old house attic, I've noticed a couple of times they have used a man who comes in with a self-contained workspace, a truck kind of thing, and takes the windows out, redoes them in some sort of way, and then puts them back in with like plastic things here sort of thing, so they become like tilt and all this, and he uses the old glass. Is anybody in this area doing that? You know,
Jim, do you do that?
That gets pretty involved, actually.
Yeah.
When you're trying to utilize the old sash, actually, they redo the sash with a new double glazed window.
to use the old glass, because I've got my house is like that wonderful old glass, and it just kills me to think about replacing.
Well, you know, there are places where the guys that sell the gold glass too, so, but you know, if you're gonna go to that extent, boy, it's, well, I don't know, that, as far as trying to restore the window, basically they're reglazing it, correct? And repainting it for you. Is that what you're saying, that they take it out, reglaze it?
They make it, as I've seen it on a couple of times, the windows end up being kind of like, you know, with the tilt sort of.
Oh, okay, but they still utilize just a single pane glass. Well, that really goes a long ways, but you know, nowadays they have the new double glaze. I guess most people that we run into are looking more for the efficiency of the window than to preserve the old glass book, so.
I think probably, we had a comment here, what they're doing is I think they actually cut the side of the window and then put new plastic things in so you can, or on the sides, so you can open it up. Right. Oh, I don't know of any, or I don't know of anybody in Cedar Rapids either, but they're, yeah, I'm not sure if that's,
The only thing I've seen where you put the original window back in, you can go to Menards or somewhere and you can buy these plastic channels, and I did it on 21 of my windows out in the house. Took the parting stops out, put the new windows in, put the channel in. They weren't tilt-up out done. But it did.
You just
It did
replace
take.
the pulley thing, don't they?
Yeah, you take the pulleys out, or mine didn't have pulleys, they were just pegs. You had 3 notches. Then you can fill any gaps in. And that's, when I restored my house out in the country, it was interesting that you can put a great window in and really cut down on infiltration, but to do a good job, you really need to fill the area around, especially if you have a brick home. We took the inside trim off the face of our, and we found golf balls, and I don't know how they got there, walnuts, and the mice were using it for a hotel. You need to throw those up too.
We'll come back to windows in just a minute. Let's finish up the paint section, because windows is next. Windows are done.
Another question that was raised earlier is if you had insulation blown into your house and you had those unsightly plugs on the front and it really does catch your eye, what do I do about it? Well, preventative would be, versus, you know, having the holes in the siding of your house, is to remove the siding where it's going to be drilled and the insulation put in. But as far as how would I'm going to ask whoever knows, if you do have the plugs, what would you recommend? If you wanted to make it more so that they didn't stick out when you're repainting, or anybody have any?
Do you have plastic plugs?
It was plastic plugs that the person approached me about.
Well, other way, you know, they do have, sometimes when they cut them out, they leave the dowel and put it back in. But that's pretty expensive work. You gotta go ahead and put a filler in and sand it and the whole deal. That's, well, you know, the only way, really. Short of putting new siding on those sections.
Super glue.
That'll work.
Any other questions?
It's sort of a question and a comment. You were talking about the siding and the difficulty in terms of finding wood. There's only so much wood around, and it only grows so fast, and there's a lot of houses, and so there's a sort of an ecology aspect to this. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about that, and about perhaps other materials aside from aluminum and vinyl that have been used or could be used on old houses. There is a, I don't know exactly what it's made out of, but some sort of a cement type of product that can be used in terms of clapboards. This was a major issue in Iowa City with the Summit Street neighborhood in terms of what could or couldn't be done there. And the Historic Preservation Commission eventually went along with the builder and eventually allowed him to use this cement type of material. I've seen it on a couple of new homes, and from a distance, it really looks pretty good. How it's going to hold up in the long run, I think, is an issue, and I don't know what it does to breathing of houses, but there's only so much of this redwood and other things that we're going to have.
And that is true. And I'm not familiar with the concrete use of the siding that you mentioned. I don't know if anybody else, Ed?
I've got a house we're going to on this next fall. And I've heard good things about it. It holds paint well and it won't rot. So I mean, there are some benefits to it. And it goes up in a clapboard type of fashion, so probably blend in pretty well.
So the asbestos.
Masonite's gotten pretty good rep too over the years. I don't know, Kenny, your experience with Masonite, we did a project maybe 14 years ago and we back primed it, re-primed it, because a lot of times the Masonite comes with a really shoddy primer. So you re-primed it for base, you back primed it, we applied it, painted it under real good conditions, no sunlight on it, in order to paint, used a high quality paint. And it was, it's been 14 years now, and the house looks like new. And it's a Masonite product, which has had a bad rap because of paint problems. But I think if it's handled correctly.
I think with Masonite, the key is that it was new, right?
Yes, it's all.
See that, and that's the key to it too. So many times, Masonite, if you let it go any length of time past what it should be, anytime it starts to crack on the bottom of that, where you get little hairline cracks, moisture has already gotten in there and it's already starting to deteriorate, even though you can't see it. And no matter how much you paint it, there's still cracks still will develop, or they'll still be able to get moisture in that. And I've got the same thing on my house. I have nothing but problems in my own place because I've got that stuff on it, and it just, I think it's terrible, but part of it is because it wasn't taken care of previous to that. And once it goes too long, then every nail swells, every lip underneath the siding will swell up, and then eventually, if you do it early and do it properly, like prime both sides and put maybe a couple good coats of good quality paint on it, it's amazing how long, and keep it up. And that's another thing that I try to tell people all the time whenever I'm painting, that especially older homes that have many coats of paint on them and are very, they're in pretty bad shape, is, after you paint your house completely and pay somebody or do it yourself, whichever, set up some type of a maintenance program for yourself so you're not, in 5, 7, 8 years having to go through the whole thing. If you would take care of it as it goes, it helps for wood deterioration, it helps for when you do your caulking. If you have a bad place, scrape it, sand it good, give it a good primer. If you keep that up, it helps a lot. And most people don't do it. Most people just let it go until it gets bad again, and then decide to paint it again. But that's one thing that helps too. So.
Thank you.